All right, cool. I'll kick it off and we'll get started. Um, Introduction, Blumira and Cybrary. We're talking today about simplifying cloud security. I'm the host, Patrick Garrity, and glad to have two others join me, Will Carlson from Cybrary, Director of Content, and Mike Behrmann, Director of Security at Blumira. So Will, it'd be great to hear a little bit about your background and Cybrary as well and what you guys do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Patrick. I appreciate the invite to join today. A little bit about my background. I've been in IT and cybersecurity for 15 years. Primarily my focus has been in small to medium business sector. So really great to be talking with you guys today. I've definitely felt some of the pain points that Blumira tries to help folks resolve. And my work in small to medium business has been in the financial services sector, so a really heavily regulated space. Basically, the joke always was that if it plugged into the wall, it was ultimately my responsibility to make sure that it worked and that it was secure. So I've done a little bit of everything in my career. I actually came to Cybrary as a learner years ago now and filled every contract role they would let me fill before coming on full time with the organization last year. But for anybody not on the call familiar with Cybrary, I mean, we're the leading cybersecurity professional development platform in the space. We have over 3 million users on the platform that are really here to upskill in their roles as cybersecurity professionals. And there are hundreds of organizations that use us using our Cybrary for Teams product to do the same for their teams. And that Cybrary for Teams product really helps security and IT leaders identify what gaps are on their teams. And then we couple that with expert-led courses on the most in-demand skills and certifications with hands-on labs, and allow those organizations to develop internally really high-performance teams that are positioned to answer the call for the perpetual risks that they face every day. And our mission at Cybrary is to close the cybersecurity skills gap. And from a content perspective, we go to work every day trying to put content together to help people do that.
Hey, and one question I have for you, got to put you on the spot.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think this is great. I think so often it's IT people, right, that are tasked with doing security as a second job. And so it sounds like that's really, one of the tenets of what you guys are doing is enabling these people to learn and get the skills necessary to address that need. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on our individual product, that's how I kind of came in, right? So being the IT and the network admin for my family's business most recently, if I didn't do it, it wasn't going to get secured. So I realized real early on in my career that all that was on me. So I tried to grow those skills and came to Cybrary to do that. I know for our Teams product, hats off to the organizations that are looking out for professional development. Mike and I talked about that just the other day.
We did.
But we do have in that space organizations that are absolutely looking to have those teams or to grow those capacities and skills within their organizations as well.
Hey, and our friend Christopher said they love Cybrary, so
Love it.
So does Blumira.
Good validation. And then Mike, you want to give us a quick background on yourself?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Introduction, Director of Security on my end. I oversee the threat hunting, research, and development of the detections that go into the Blumira platform. My background runs the offensive security space at the NSA for about 5 or 6 years. And the past 7 or 8 have been on the blue side, the defensive security side, helping protect organizations, enterprise, SMB, mid-market alike, with their security challenges based on that attacker knowledge. Blumira itself is a automated security operations product that's designed to serve as a security information and event management software, but also come with pre-baked threat detections to make finding the bad easier. And obviously, the biggest part of our value proposition that we're happy about is how easy it is to deploy. It's trivial to deploy this technology, and given all the integrations that come natively available with it.
Sweet. So I'm looking forward to talking about cloud security in general. Myself, Patrick Garrity, VP Operations at Blumira. I've had a heart for small business for a long time. I worked in a managed service provider, small, essentially helping them with small business IT, and then consultant engineer type of role, and then went to Duo Security, which we focused initially on the small medium-sized businesses providing two-factor, and then now Blumira really did a similar problem set in the security space to what Duo was, from prevention, now doing detection and response. And then the U of M shirt is just because like I didn't actually go to U of M. I just target U of M co-founders and go and work with them. So, this is my fifth startup, and all of them happen to be U of M founders. So kind of funny there. But yeah, let's hop in. And while we're going through, I think, important thing to mention is like, feel free to chat, put your comments, questions in the chat as we're talking through these things. It's meant to be conversational. And we're going to talk about some of the different cloud security threats and things to consider. And, one of the things I think you just open up question wise for you guys is, what's your perspective on what shifts you've seen to cloud, and what, with that shift, what people have to be thinking of from a security program perspective?
Sure. I think there's a number of angles you could bring up here, but there are at least two or three that come to mind. One, the rush to embrace the cloud, particularly during COVID times, where companies are trying to accommodate a remote workforce in a very urgent, time-sensitive way. But then also the move to hybrid cloud scenarios, where you have on-prem assets, traditional assets, infrastructure endpoints, and then one or several different cloud services that are a part of that environment as well, that make up part of that business's IT assets. And then finally, multi-cloud more recently. People are not single brand anymore. They are trying to integrate with the best features in all the products, right? That's totally understandable from a consumer perspective. But with that brings an enormous amount of risk. As we make these environments more complex, we federate the trust between these sorts of things for SSO purposes. Lots of interesting security threats.
It's interesting you say that, Mike. I know from in my experience, it's been really challenging. A lot of small businesses tend to jump in and think that, oh, we're going to go to one of these cloud providers because they're going to handle our security for us. Look at all these things they do. And they totally forget that this is a shared security model. And then when they go multi-cloud, they don't realize that not everybody's securing all of the same things. And that thing that's named similarly and does that's a VPN's a VPN, right? It's like, no, not exactly. The devil's really in the details. And then when you've got to start monitoring all of the traffic to AWS and to Azure, and then now we've got a shadow IT from another department that decided they were going to roll Google Cloud. It gets really challenging really fast because there's a whole lot to manage, and people think that the vendors are taking care of it for them, and they don't even realize the complexity they've introduced into their environments.
Very much so. Very much so.
I agree, and it's not that they're gonna deploy to Google Cloud. They already did, and they didn't tell you.
No, you're already there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's a key thing, is like a lot of times IT and then also security gets surprised by these things.
Patrick, or not, because they're just not watching, right? I mean, they just have no idea that those things have happened because they're not monitoring things that are going on.
Yeah. It's funny how with the cloud, all these classic IT security challenges have really just taken a new shape, whether that's asset management, whether that's employing the least privilege principle, to new cloud-based technologies that are becoming essential parts of a business. To the security practitioners out there, a lot of it, what the phrase "there's nothing new under the sun" comes to mind for me. Once you dig closely enough at it, it's a lot of the same issues, and that's good and bad for defenders, because we kind of know what we need to look for. But sometimes that expertise, that knowledge isn't in wide supply. So we got to share that knowledge or make things easier for people. Yeah,
no, I'll agree completely from a Cybrary perspective, right? So having having people on my team and on my staff previously that had a really firm foundation in the basics and the fundamentals that nobody really wants to talk about, right? Those aren't the exciting parts of cybersecurity that you see on TV and Mr. Robot, and they're not talking about the OSI model there. I mean, come on, let's be real. But it changes so fast, right? The technologies change, the cloud changes. It's all moving so quickly that to have people with a firm grasp of the fundamentals means we can be multi-cloud and largely okay. We can ask smart questions about Azure or Google Cloud because we have an understanding of what's actually going on under the hood, what the workload really is. It's not just a product that we're buying. And those fundamentals are so important.
They are. And let's be honest, the best security practitioners realize the business's needs come before everything, right? And so if the business sees a need to transition to O365 away from their on-prem mail exchange server, that's not inherently bad. That's not what this presentation is not going to take a position on that. It's really dealing with the reality, which is hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, the advantages and disadvantages of having that on-prem dependency or identity provider. We don't take a position on that. We're literally just going to deal with reality about this and talk about some of the problems that arise with it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And Nate made a good comment on the comments. Not only, as it shifted cloud and people had 5 to 10 year projects, the pandemic pushed all their projects to like a month or two long. And I think the reality is like, yeah, for good reason, people are going there. But the other challenge is like, you went there so fast, who knows if it's secure or not. Yeah. And then I think getting into the attacks, it's like the time that people now have working remote from home because of COVID or toying around, I think also lend itself towards the rise in attacks, as it relates to, hey, where can I hit low hanging fruit? What's a target? And I think we see that all over the place with small, medium-sized businesses is like, they just are unprepared to deal with it. From an attack perspective, things like ransomware, being a key driver there.
One of the big realizations that people need to make about adopting cloud technologies, which again is a good thing, or at least a benign thing, is you are changing, if not increasing, your attack surface area. Those cloud assets, unless it's a special private cloud, they tend to be public, which means just that. Whereas a lot of the services that you had in the traditional on-prem environment were gated behind a firewall, multiple firewalls, an IDS, you name it. Those services were only accessible to local employees and local devices. That's not the case with a lot of this public cloud technology.
Hey, but I thought they told me that if it's in the cloud, it's secure.
The cloud providers take security very seriously, but as my friend Will pointed out recently, it's really a shared responsibility model. They're doing their part on the back end to keep that data center secure, and they're very serious about it. All the major vendors are. However, as a user, as a consumer, as a application owner, there are a variety of security responsibilities that come to that sometimes get overlooked.
Yeah, that's not even withstanding the fact that we can't transfer our risk and our data ownership rights either, right? So it's in the cloud and the cloud got breached, but that's ultimately on the organization.
Correct.
Rebecca's comments, the salesperson said it's secure since they have the new cloud. Oh man, that's great. I think
the
reality is
run away.
No, ask to talk to their security team or their product team is my recommendation. But I think on that note too, not everything is secure by default. Like you do have to configure and set things in a certain manner or way that ensure that type of security.
You can just name it, Patrick. You're talking about S3 buckets, so go ahead.
Always S3 buckets. One of the many. Two-factor authentication. I mean, I think they did just make it default on some new accounts on Microsoft, but
no, those are upcharges. They cost more money.
That too. Too funny. So yeah, want to talk a little bit about, like, hey, Mike, I think you have a pretty good perspective on some of the different stages of an attack and what that looks like in a cloud or hybrid cloud environment.
Sure, I think it's helpful to review what these are. This cycle is it's a very powerful one. It's not just what attackers do and how they do, but it's how defenders can mount a defense, can secure a network, architect a network in such a way to make these things particularly difficult. But it begins with discovery, right? Discovering an asset that they want to potentially attack, enumerating that, ultimately gaining a foothold in it, whether it's through a server-side vulnerability exploit or something that attacks the endpoint directly and works from the inside out. From there, almost every attacker is going to want to escalate privileges so that they can have more freedom of movement and freedom of execution. The privileges cannot be overlooked when it comes to exploiting a network. But ultimately, there's a point where files are executed, whether they are local dual use binaries in the case of attackers who are trying to live off the land, so to speak. But ultimately, there's also a case where data needs to leave the network. The attacker has that problem every single time. It's inescapable. The data needs to go from one place to another for it to be successfully exfiltrated. That, again, is an opportunity for an attacker, the defender, to monitor and hunt for opportunities there. And then ultimately, more and more, let's be honest, we see access being not just established through different exploitative methods, but access being resold to different ransomware actors or different malware families. So these attackers are actually cooperating on the back end to deploy ransomware or deploy different malware in a different sequence to maximize the opportunity.
Yeah, and I think it's been interesting, a combination of like ransomware now with data exfiltration, right? Where they're actually like taking data and threatening to release it publicly.
Or they are, they're
just
telling
the
your customers
creation. Yes, yeah. So just the creation from a standpoint of new ways to go about this is pretty interesting. The reasons why people are doing such. So, we're gonna hop in and kind of take from that and talk about some of the specific environments. So first off, cloud infrastructure, Microsoft Azure, AWS. Curious, Will and Mike, what things come to mind, from a visibility perspective that, people don't necessarily realize in these environments that you got to take into consideration?
Well, I'll let you go first and I'll hop on at the end there.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me, and I know I've talked to a lot of people who are talking about Sentinel, right? And not to pick on Sentinel, I think it's a great product, but it does tend to be expensive, and I think people just shoehorn solutions in from a cloud perspective because it's what they feel like they're offered. And the reality is that you can secure that environment with a lot of different tools. I know in my previous environments, we worked really hard to roll the same security stack across the cloud providers that we were already familiar with in a lot of ways. So having a similar tool set, regardless of the cloud provider and what the workload was a huge benefit for us, regardless of what those tools were. And I know that Blumira kind of answers that from the space that you guys live in as well. Just, when you have a small team, you don't oftentimes have the ability to run a best of breed solution and to have 7 or 8 different products that all do different things. You really need that single pane of glass as much as you can to secure those environments. And we're not just talking about the on-prem environment now. Like you mentioned, Mike, we're talking about the on-prem and the multi-cloud environments that we have as well. So being able to roll a similar tool set across the workloads is really important. Yeah,
you're absolutely right, Will. And one of the things here at Blumira we do is we try to simplify the integration of all these different cloud solutions from a security perspective. But in the course of doing that, maybe as a more interesting story, when you unpack some of these modern cloud platform technologies, particularly their logging structures that usually reflect the APIs involved. You're talking about dozens of different schemas. The point is it's complex. It's not just Windows Event IDs like you're used to for application system and security with the on-prem model. The cloud introduces significant complexity as far as logging goes. Logging matters because, of course, you want to monitor what's happening in your cloud in a real meaningful way. And just figuring out what logs to look for alone is a major challenge. But, we have examples right here. We talked about that stage earlier in the attack chain where you're trying to gain a foothold. And we talked about the added risk that comes with these public cloud services. For me, I think initial access or gaining footholds still rings true. I mean, right here, we had listed different Blumira detections. Brute force, still super popular, right? But instead of being run from a client within an on-prem network against a DC or something like that, you actually have this coming in from the outside. And there have been proven documented ways to sort of subvert that public facing authentication mechanism if there aren't the right isn't the right configuration there, whether it's not locked down, whether there is no policy around the geography that a login should occur from, whether there's multi-factor authentication, or a strong password policy for like that. If you have Spring 2021 as your AD password and you have O365, there's a fair chance people are trying to get into your network.
Nobody uses insecure passwords on the top 100 list anymore, Mike.
It's true. We've grown beyond that, haven't we, Will? We've grown beyond that. And so I'm not even sure why I bring it up, but it is super important. It is super common. Again, this is not an indemnification of the cloud. It's simply understanding the risk that comes with adopting it to the organization.
It's true. Some of the comments, and I'll hop to some of the next areas. I think there's a theme. Somebody mentioned zero trust. Someone else mentioned some of the practices, even when you sign in onto cloud, right? And I led some of the zero trust stuff at Cisco after we got acquired at Duo. And, I think what's important here is yes, controls, making sure a device is corporate owned is a good example of ensuring a higher level of success, making sure it's up to date, using two-factor, all these things. The reality in the world is those things get missed. And so you need some way also to detect when those things are configured properly, or other techniques or tactics are going on that show something actually does get compromised. So it's good feedback. I agree with the zero trust mentality wherever it's possible. I think it's also, for a lot of organizations, a tough feat to implement and get right. And I think, some of the technologies are making that easier, which help. The next thing, shifting a little bit is productivity and suites like Office 365 and G Suite. I think continually we see these leveraged in different types of attacks that are successful. I think some of the things from my observation perspective is it's essentially the keys of the kingdom in a lot of ways once you get access to a mailbox. And then there's things to consider like documents that can be shared for exfiltration and whatnot. But yeah, curious to get your takes too on the productivity angle. And I think also the recent Exchange, vulnerability, which threw up a ton of people in figuring out what to do because they still have on-premise. Curious to get your guys' thoughts on that.
I think the cloud-based productivity suites are maybe one of the most less understood technologies from a security and vulnerability perspective that there are. If you look at some of the biggest attacks that the cyber insurance providers respond to, one of the biggest things is business email compromise over and over and over again. And so what you see here are different detections that Blumira provides. These are very subtle behaviors. Mailbox rule creation, you and I would all probably take that for granted. That's something simple that attackers can do to try to keep forensicators and security analysts out from investigating or making that difficult, or simply trying to evade the actual legitimate user from noticing what's going on. It helps them control information and ultimately is a form of defensive evasion. Geo Impossible, another huge one as well. Companies know where their employees are, and if they don't, they should. More and more, however, we do have clients coming in from all over the world. That's the nature of the COVID world. That's the nature of this giant all the interconnectedness we have. However, when you have login authentication attempts from geos that you don't recognize, that don't fall within your user behavior, your traveling workforce, you need to know when that's happening for sure.
I think this one's really
interesting.
Yeah, and sorry, Patrick.
I'll go ahead, Will. No,
I think this one's interesting just because of the title of it, right? So these are productivity suites. These are tools that are supposed to make us more productive. So, when you stop from a security perspective and think about, where on the spectrum these tools are going to come down, I think it's pretty clear third-party tools that are focused on productivity are going to prioritize price and functionality. And I think, in my experience, at least, those things don't necessarily go hand in hand with highly secure environments. Highly secure environments can tend to be more expensive, and that two sides of the coin for security, functionality or security, right? So by default, I think these things are not secure. And there's a whole lot of configuration required to secure them. And then you start securing things, and then there's friction, and then employees complain, and the organization didn't really know why they were securing in the first place or what they were really out to secure. So the security initiative just gets kicked to the curb. And even then, as I mentioned earlier, there are so many tools. Like if you're on G Suite, there's a whole host of tools that you can use to secure those environments. So, I would say again, those things are great to do. It's really nice to, protect your data in your environment. But if you're not detecting and responding when things go wrong, you're only looking at a little tiny piece of the risk associated with these tools.
Yeah, taking advantage of the visibility provided by these productivity suites is absolutely huge. It can be a little complex, but having a mastery or having an outside party that has mastery, or a product that has some sort of mastery or expertise knowledge of these productivity suites is huge, because the logs can be invaluable from a threat detection standpoint.
All right, taking a step further, and I think these solutions tie in a lot of times with productivity as well, which is identity. And expanding out, so your products like Azure AD and Microsoft Okta Duo, Active Directory as well, ADFS. I think you see less common ADFS nowadays, but certainly a thing. And I think this ties back to things you guys were talking about earlier, which is identity being such a key target. And one thing I forgot to mention on the Office 365 piece is I was even involved. This is more a friend reaching out to me on Office 365, where they knew their account had been compromised, and they enabled two-factor, right? Which is well intended, but they also didn't check hey, was all my email being forwarded? And so I think there is this aspect of there's more controls than just doing one thing, or one silver bullet in solving these issues. You do have to continually monitor one way or another when for things that are what we would categorize as anomalous, right? So shifting a little bit to the cloud identity side, just curious with the shift there, if there's any observations you guys have seen beyond, same techniques and tactics of password spraying, over privileged accounts, domain admins being created, that sort of stuff in an attack.
I feel like I'm singing the same song over and over here. I think that so much of the preventions of these things is doing the things that security professionals know we ought to be doing, but we don't always do a great job of. Password spraying may be a little bit harder than brute force, but there are ways to prevent that too, right? And they're really sensible ways that I think, in my professional experience, don't really cause high friction for legitimate users, right? So being IP blocked to not be able to log in with the cloud identity when I'm not actually in the United States, when we have a United States organization, doesn't cause me any friction as a user. But it eliminates a lot of the risk here, particularly for identity, right? I mean, you've taken your AD, which for years and years was an on-premise tool, and you've publicly exposed the thing. And if it's not secured well, it's just, I mean, we don't leave, I guess it depends on where you live in your neighborhoods, but increasingly, I would say we don't leave our windows and doors open when we're on vacation for a week. Yet, some organizations are doing that with their identity providers by not securing them well.
That's completely accurate. I think cloud identity is one of the most fascinating attack vectors in the entire cloud security discussion. We've mentioned a couple of times how a lot of cloud technologies aren't well understood. Cloud identity ranks chief among them, I would argue. People need to understand the risk and interdependency with a federated hybrid environment. The credentials that you try to protect with on-prem assets may expose access to cloud-based infrastructure if federated together and poorly protected. It's something the NSA brought up in mid-December in the wake of the SolarWinds attack. That initial access was being exposed by those attackers to pivot from the on-prem infrastructure into the cloud effortlessly. And so they came out and spoke about how federated authentication can be abused. This is a hugely misunderstood topic. It does get a little complicated. It's not something that figures into our risk modeling enough, I would argue. But it's something we all need to think about. There's great interdependency in these between on-prem assets and public cloud assets that we need to consider, that we need to monitor for.
It's interesting, Mike. I wonder, as from the attacker perspective, right? As soon as you get legitimate credentials, I mean, obviously you want to escalate and get admin privileges so you can do the other things that you want to do. But from a detect perspective, as soon as somebody has legitimate credentials, they're a lot harder to find, right? So you've got a legitimate admin running around doing things that now you're looking at behavior analysis of would I expect my admin to be doing these things, which is such a level or two deeper into the detection scheme of things. I would say that, as soon as somebody has identity, it's not just about the permissions or the privileges that come along with it. It's the fact that they're authenticated and authorized as that particular person.
Well, you called it out perfectly, and the word is behaviors. Unlike cloud security, unlike a lot of traditional endpoint security, antivirus, for instance, which is either, something's being quarantined that's a threat or not, that's doing the work for you. I feel like there's a lot of poorly configured cloud identity management solutions and infrastructure out there that are not acting in that way. And then even spotting the threat, spotting the behavior within the logs themselves is not a binary thing necessarily. It takes context to do it correctly for your environment. And it's usually not something the cloud provider assists with. Sometimes they do, but how effective it is depends probably on how well your policies is configured for that. And let's be honest, that's not something that gets talked about from a cloud identity perspective enough.
Correlation is hard, right? It depends so much on the environment and what people should or should not be doing. A lot of times the cloud providers they don't have the information to answer those requests.
Right. And we talked about this a few minutes ago, and it's not new. Living off the land behavior. What that really boils down to is dual use binaries in an on-prem type environment, but making, abusing and exploiting credentials to do things the legitimate way, but with somebody who's not authorized to perform that particular behavior or action. That can be exceedingly difficult to detect. It takes a lot of correlation. It takes a lot of context. And even when you find it, you need to know what questions to ask to adjudicate that situation correctly, to confirm what you think is happening and correlate that with different possibilities and basically whittle down to whether or not it's a threat or not.
Hey, and on that note, I think within this cloud infrastructure, you of course have on-premise infrastructure, but it's like you still have your servers.
Yeah.
and I think that's a you know, a little bit good segue is the reality is you still have the same problems you had on premise in the cloud. And a lot of times people act like all those concerns go away, but the reality is this stuff is even more likely to be accessible from anywhere.
Yeah.
A lot of times is what we see too. And so, you know, I think you're talking about different techniques and tactics. There's a few here like Blue Keep and Cobalt Strike that continually show, you know, people trying to gain access where they shouldn't be, right? And so, you know, curious how that ties into how people are looking at this from a detection response perspective.
I think it's still important to lock down the same way you would want to lock down or harden a server in an on-prem environment, whether it was publicly exposed or privately exposed. A lot of the same things ring true for cloud-based servers, for cloud-based storage devices in particular. You need to apply the least privilege principle. You need to remove any extraneous services that are on that server. Again, it's a lot of what's happening on-prem is very, very relevant to the cloud.
Agree. I mean, you can't go wrong there. And I think like misconfigurations, we talked a little bit about this before, but like it extends out where it's like people don't realize that, and this is true, especially in small, medium-sized businesses, but it happens with enterprises too. RDP or SMB or SSH exposed on the internet. There's nothing wrong with people actually don't know those things. Lots of times don't know that those things shouldn't be on the internet. Is one level, and then a lot of times they just don't know, or they might know that in the stuff's exposed, right? And so being able to monitor and be able to catch these sorts of things, and then the last thing are common security controls like multi-factor, where maybe it's not enabled or maybe there's a bypass going on. All too often I've heard like, hey, a CEO or an executive doesn't want two-factor because of inconvenience. You know, that's 8 years ago. That's one of the reasons why we built a bypass feature within Duo. There's other good reasons to have bypass, right? But sometimes that gets said and then it gets forgotten about. And the next thing you know, you have a compromised account because of a setting. And so it is important also to look at the configuration side of things as it relates to your cloud and on-premise infrastructure too. You know, and I think broadening, you start to look at this, it's like there's just a lot of things to actually look for in an environment. Like you're just basically duplicating things you're looking for, if not increasing complexity when you start to introduce cloud applications and cloud infrastructure. Is that right, Will and Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to jump in and say further complication again in the same vein I've mentioned a couple of times is just changing password spraying settings in one cloud provider is going to be different from the next, and it could get undone, or somebody could change it, or depending on how privileges are set up for who can change what. And you know, it's complicated enough to have multi-cloud environments. Although, Mike, to your point, there are oftentimes serious business justifications to do so, but then the configurations for the same feature ultimately can be so very different from provider to provider. So, you know, I think in reality, as humans, we're only capable of managing sufficiently so much complexity. And I know documentation helps. I was going to mention documentation and data flows earlier, Patrick, but you know, it's one of those things that I don't think I've ever met an IT or security person that they are excited to go to work and update documentation today.
Yep.
That's what they look forward to, but it's so important. And again, past all of that, I think, you know, we talk about living in an assumed breach world now. I think we need to live in an assumed misconfiguration world as well, where we are going to miss things. So it's not enough to think that, well, we're just going to protect our environment. You've got to be detecting and responding to things that happen in the environment with, you know, whatever that tool is, or a tool very much like Blumira.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I see misconfiguration as a longtime security practitioner, it's very easy to roll your eyes, blow it off. It couldn't possibly be me. It couldn't possibly be my organization that has a a domain controller and DNS server that's exposed on RDP. And yet the entire cybersecurity insurance industry has been built around that very use case, more or less, to oversimplify things in a glib way. It does happen all the time. You would hope it doesn't. Any experienced practitioner would hope it doesn't. It's extremely common, and the results are devastating. The attackers know or find that that device is RDP accessible from the internet. They will brute force their way in and ultimately ransom the entire environment. It happens every day. It's happening right now, and that's not just a FUD statement. It's just a fact. Lots of people in the DFIR and insurance space are making money off of that scenario alone.
It's really interesting, Mike. You talk about,
Yep.
we talk about not victim shaming in the space, right?
Yeah.
But I know in my previous experience, we had a major OS update rolled out to our edge devices within the network. So we've got a number of edge devices across geographically all over the place. And this update rolled out, not a big deal. We did internal testing. It looks like it's not going to break anything. It's a security update. Great. We need to roll it out. We roll it out. Going through and doing a regular, vulnerability assessment as we did, and identify that OS update was significant enough. And for some reason, the vendor thought it smart to re-enable the default admin account on all of these edge devices. So
yes.
We didn't do anything wrong. It was nowhere in the change log, because what vendor is
Yep.
going to say, oh, by the way, we're re-enabling the default admin account? I'm sure it was a misconfiguration on their end.
Yep.
But had we not been looking for that, we would have been one of those that was exposed to a seemingly dumb, quote unquote, that would never happen to me. I know better, kind of an error that was no fault of our own, really.
William, that reminds me of SolarWinds in so many ways. I mean, 14 to 18,000 customers were made vulnerable by a vendor decision and a vendor-related breach. I think we need to be honest with ourselves that the vendors absolutely are part of that risk picture that we need to think about, that we need to ask hard questions of, and that we need to architect around to minimize the impact where possible or where appropriate. Because you're right, exactly what you're talking about can happen, and it's happened in ways big and small ever since. And yet we know we depend on these vendors for their different services and products. So it's not going away. It's a reality we need to think about. The solutions are going to change with each one of the problems, but it's something we need to be thinking about creatively on an ongoing basis, to sort of imagine something like that could happen. To not consider it at all is a very real possibility, and then sometimes it's too late. And so security is vigilance in so many ways, but it's usually continuously thinking in a creative way about what could go wrong, to find the vulnerabilities and address them, and be prepared to respond otherwise in an adverse event.
I think this is my favorite slide in the entire presentation, Patrick. It's like the distillation of the last 15 years of my career.
Yeah. I mean, it's all too often, I talk to companies, hundreds, I'd say, in a month. Consistency is like, hey, we don't have enough resources and time, or expertise, right? And it's because, like, hey, yeah, they're trying to service the business and the business needs, which might be completely different than some of the technical requirements. But the challenge in security is, like, there are a lot of complex tools, and some of them have great purpose, right? And I think your comment about Microsoft earlier and Sentinel is reflective of that. Like, Sentinel's a really good tool. Splunk's a great tool. These things have their purposes, but the challenge is it's complicated to actually get value out of them without having the resources to operationalize them. In addition to that, organizations, you look at a firewall and the number of security alerts it kicks off, or EDR, or really any of these products, it gets overwhelming. And so it's like, the question is, hey, what should I actually focus on? And so it is hard to get a sense of success, any success or progress in security, because of the reality of what these organizations are in. And it sounds like, Will, you have some thoughts in regards to that as well, working for a small business.
Yeah, no, I think all these things are absolutely and infinitely true. I know they're a big part of what got me into the space in the first place was, trying to do everything we possibly could to have as hygienically clean an IT and a network environment as possible, because we had a limited team. We needed to be really proactive about the sensible things that we were doing. But I realized that again, that wasn't enough. I've mentioned a couple of times today just how important that it is to be watching and to be mindful of what's going on, because you're just going to miss things. And even more so when there's complex tools. And I know we have talked a bit today about the cloud is great. There are great tools there, but adding in a third party always adds in a lot of complexity, a lot of discussion that oftentimes doesn't happen, and a lack of understanding about who's taking care of what. And that's just with one third party provider. And then when you add in multiples, man, the complexity, it doesn't just get a little bit, it's not a linear complexity curve we're talking about here, guys. I mean, it's exponential, all in the name of a lot of the times of productivity, and the business needs to have people work from wherever, and we're moving really fast. And I think a lot of these things are old time tenets of security, and it just has a different face in some ways. But man, the one that makes me laugh the most is too many alerts. I remember deploying years ago our first SIM, and it was hard enough to get it deployed and monitoring. We won't go into the fun of syslog and all that is that, and parsing logs, and oh my gosh. And that was in a small on-prem environment. But boy, when I got it set up, I just wanted to crawl under my desk, because the alert fatigue was unbelievable. I remember talking to one of my coworkers. I was like, what have I done? What did I do to myself? Now I get to show out this report and try to explain why there's so much in here. And whittling down that alert fatigue is significant work. And I'll say for me, I learned an awful lot about my environment and what really mattered through that exercise. But man, those three items are spot on.
Yep. What I came from the prevention side, being at Duo, right, for 8 years. And I think there was a lot of like, just enable two-factor, you're all set. And I think we went down further than that with zero trust and making sure things are updated. But yeah, what I've learned is first off, coming into the space, everyone told me, why are you going into this market? Like, this is an awful, evil part of the market that nobody likes, which is actually true, right? It's like, it's super complicated to get a SIM product up and running, get logging, getting to correlation detection, all these different things in place. I mean, one of the realities why I'm here is because of the fact that this product team essentially has built and Blumira has built a product that we can deploy in an hour to 2 hours and immediately start surfacing high fidelity things from a risk perspective and real threats, and then helping the organization take action, whether it's through automation or a human understandable playbook on what to do. And as we look at the cloud security stack, we're just about to roll out AWS as well, just to give everyone a heads up. You all are the first to hear. It's a press embargo though, so don't tell anybody.
What?
I'm kidding. This isn't press.
Alicia's having a heart
y'all are
attack.
privileged. I wanted to make a Solar keyboard joke, but I couldn't come up with one. But yeah, the reality is like we plug into the existing environment a customer has in a matter of an hour or two to get high fidelity visibility into real threats and risk without having all the work that goes into deploying a solution. And essentially what you get out of that is detecting hundreds of techniques and tactics, but some of the more common ones that people are like, oh, I'm worried about that, is things like the exchange vulnerability, password spraying, reconnaissance scanning. And I think the reality is, when I ask the question to most small businesses, like, how do you get visibility into any of these things today? It suddenly goes quiet, and there's the blank stare look of like, oh, well, I wasn't even thinking about that. Is a lot of times I think the reality. And I think ignorance is bliss mentality is kind of in some regards not being accepted anymore. when people are getting hit with these breaches, right? Right, Will?
Absolutely. I think something that this makes me think of a lot is just I know from a professional development perspective, at Cybrary, we deal with a lot of people that are wanting to come in and learn these skills. And man, there's a lot to learn. I mean, Mike, in your career, I mean, you didn't just wake up one day and have all the benefit of your years of experience and the organizations that you've worked with. But, we just tack on to that. You have to be able to read logs. You have to be able to identify malicious behaviors. You have to have a really fundamental understanding of your environment. And then you have to know all the fundamentals that we talked about, networking. You've got to know about operating systems. You've got to know about what the attackers are doing and TTPs that they're using. There's so much to know. We know we need to be watching. We lived in a world so long that was secure the perimeter, and that's good enough. And I think that thankfully the tide is changing, that we know we need to watch. But then you layer on top of that the complexity, Patrick, to your point of, great, all these things for now that you need to watch. Yep. It's going to change tomorrow, number one. And number two, you've got to learn, configure, deploy, continually monitor, and maintain a new tool to do all that for you. So the cognitive load for professionals to keep up with all these things is really complicated. So I know, particularly for me, again, from the SMB space that I've lived in, any tools that I could use that would lower that learning curve and operationalize me faster were more than worth their cost.
Yeah, you're talking about questions of retention, questions of recruitment, questions of the need to develop that workforce that you have so that they can accomplish their mission. It's not trivial. Information security, I think, very uniquely is not for the faint of heart. Whether you're in offensive security or defensive security, it actually doesn't matter. You're committing yourself to being better every day. I don't know how many other careers that come with that same obligation, but it is a real thing. You need to find ways to scale. There are resources out there. But it's about being realistic about that. It's about being realistic about that moving threat that's happening all the time, the threat picture that's constantly evolving.
Hey, so real quick, because I want to get to Sean one more thing. I know I gotta be conscious of time, which is good. So I'll run through this first. I think someone's comment earlier about problem exists between keyboard and chair is funny. The approach we're taking, that's different. Like, we are a cloud first organization as far as build from the ground up. The assumption is we're automating all the things that everyone traditionally has had to do, is how we operate. So when we integrate with a product like AD, Azure, your firewall, your Windows host, your ADR, you can assume that ingestion, parsing, threat intelligence is correlated, detection rules are implemented, alerting, prioritization, reporting is built in. And then essentially we surface the threats to you to then either automate through taking action or helping respond via human understandable playbook. Someone has the best question ever, which is, what's the difference between Blumira versus Duo Security? Essentially, I try and communicate to people, it's like, we took Duo and we applied the same exact model. And I can't say we, like, there are some founders that built this company before Duo. When I came, the best thing I can equate it to is, like, they actually built detection and response using the same model that Duo did and making it easy, accessible, and it just gets in and goes. And that's kind of the joy, is like, it's a different part of the security space is the best way I could equate it to. And that, I don't know how someone teed up that question for me, me being from Duo.
Patrick, you didn't even mention how half of our company is former Duo employees.
Well, I guess that too. I mean, like, I always say, it's like, I'm not trying to take any credit. Like, Matt, Steve, and the founders here built this before I joined, but that's what I saw. It was like, oh, you have Duo for detection and response. Like, this is a no-brainer. And everyone in the industry is like, all the products are so hard to work with in this space. And so that's kind of the joy, just to show some things. And I probably should have hit the reset button before I came in here. But, the threats we're talking about, whether it's O365 or Oh, it's from a Duo employee. Oh, that's hilarious. I shouldn't even said that. I didn't say that. You know, showing some really quick examples. Hey, a G Suite administrator, this is a suspected threat. A new admin has been created. You'd want to validate that this was for business purposes. And if it is, that's great, cool, move on. But if it's not, I need to surface a threat and know how to respond and what to do, which is where, you know, where we help organizations. So I can essentially close this finding, and Zoom is having crazy times today. But this would then send a notification via voice, text, or email within the Blumira product. And you'll see here in a second, I then have a response that will come in just a moment. That's now a threat ticket that says, hey, there's a G Suite new administrator account, unauthorized. Here's what you should go do from an action perspective to mitigate this risk immediately from a response perspective, and where to go within the tool. And still having that backstop of, hey, you can also talk with our security analysts, like, I need some more help. So having that human interaction as well when necessary. To show a quick example of how our product works. And so hopping back, just being a few minutes, like, the joy is we integrate with nearly every product, you know, under the sun in a small to medium sized business, and for enterprise too. But being able to surface those high fidelity things quickly and not overwhelming people with a ton of alerts is a huge part of that value prop. And I just want to encourage people. It's like, yeah, similar to Duo and being able to try the product, we do the same here. Is we actually encourage people to deploy before they even buy, or they might not even have budget. And it's like, just try the product and see what risk you have. Cause like most of the time we're going to find some things you didn't know about. That makes you have some real serious conversations from a executive level perspective, and helps justify getting a tool in place like Blumira. So just want to highlight there, like, anybody and everybody, you know, you can go to blumira.com/trial, sign up for a free trial, and try the product with our team as well. And that's something that's important to us, and extending out to the community and our customers. So I mean, we're kind of at the end. That kind of concludes overall, like, discussion around cloud security. We have another minute. If there's any other questions or comments, it's really been a lot of fun, Will. I appreciate, and if you want to, you know, emphasize anything else regarding Cybrary, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we talked a bit about the importance of all the skills that you have to have in the space, and, you know, how do you get them? It can be really tough, and particularly in a hands-on, skills first sort of way. So if that's you and you're wanting to grow your careers and develop professionally, I definitely encourage everybody on the call to head on over to cybrary.it and to sign up for an account there. We have a free trial experience and a free account experience as well. There's a number of free courses on rotation every month. I think CISSP, we've got some AWS content on roll this month. So a number of courses start to finish entirely free. So head on over, upskill, and you know, in the cloud space as well. So you can have a more intelligent conversation with these Blumira folks about what it is that you ultimately need to secure.
Yeah. Yeah, we do the same thing here at
Thank you,
Blumira.
Will.
Big believers in Cybrary. Helps keep you sharp.
Thanks, Will. Thanks, Mike. And thanks, Alicia, for hosting. It's been great. And thanks for all the attendees. Great questions. Don't hesitate to hit us up if you have any other questions. You know, contact us at blumira.com, and I'm sure Cybrary has the same. So thanks so much for the time today, and hope everybody can secure their cloud environment more effectively. Take care.